Hello, my name is Ali Raposo, and I am the coordinator for the Human Rights Committee of Council and your moderator for today's event. Before we begin, I would like to provide some information on housekeeping for viewers to enhance their experience of today's event. To turn on captions or subtitles while viewing the video, click the CC button in the player's bottom toolbar. To start us off in a good way, I'd like to invite Aisha Khan, President and CEO of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, to provide the land and water acknowledgement in opening remarks.
Thank you, Ali, and thank you for the introduction and for extending an invitation for me to welcome you all here to the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. We'd like to acknowledge with gratitude that the museum is on Treaty 1 territory. We're at the crossroads of the Anishinaabeg, Ininuak, Anishinninewak, Dene Sulin, and Dakota Oyate lands. The Red River Valley is also the birthplace of the Métis, and we acknowledge the people of the Inuit Nunangat who also make their home here in these lands. We also acknowledge that the water in the museum and in Winnipeg is sourced from Shoal Lake and have deep gratitude for the First Nations that have cared for that water for thousands of years. We also acknowledge that our electricity today and here in the museum is generated from waterways in Treaty 5 lands and Treaty 3 lands and territory. It's always important for us to acknowledge where we are placed when we start events like this and on days where we speak about human rights. And I know that our Elder Thelma Morrisseau, will start us in a good way and center the discussion today, which I'm excited about. Today, on the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, we also commit really to the work that we must do to act against gender violence. And we're just days from December 6th, the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. And when I think about that, I'm struck that we're still here marking these days and calling for action to protect and honor the worth and dignity of women. I vividly recall the Montreal Massacre. I was a young girl in high school, and I remember what that felt like and thinking about that with my friends. And it was a deep sense of injustice. And I place myself now where I am today and with the people who will speak to us on this panel and those around us about that same injustice and a deeper reflection on years and years of colonial violence and injustice that brings us to where we are today. At the core of our work here at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, and I'm so pleased that we're centering this conversation here, is a commitment to document and share the real lived experiences of people as they fight for their rights to be respected, because that's a critical part of not only educating about human rights, but also in working towards a better world. And we see this time and time again, that the passing down of lived experience, work often done by women for women, holds immense power. Like Jamie Black's Red Dress Project, which is a installation in our gallery, where hanging red dresses hold space for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada and Two-Spirit people. This truth-telling not only shines a spotlight on the gendered and often racialized nature of violence, but it invites compassion and implores us to take action. Storytelling brings us in and reminds us that we all have a shared responsibility to fight for one another. But the work of eliminating gender-based violence is long and it's difficult, and there is so much to do. We know that violence is rooted in an abuse of power and a failure to see the true worth and dignity of our fellow humans, in misogyny, in white supremacy, in ableism, in colonialism. And it reflects and reinforces the status of women, most harshly Indigenous women, Black women, and all women of color who face these realities at the intersection of gender and race. It feels really good to be amongst women who are leaders in this room and to see women's voices being centered in this conversation, because representation is powerful. But we know that representation is actually only just the first step. To dismantle the structures of power that harm women and keep women from living the rights that we are born with, we need to invest in our community. When more than 40% of women have experienced some form of intimate partner violence and the home is not a safe place, it means we need to invest in safe community spaces and housing. And when Indigenous women and girls are 16 times more likely to be murdered or missing than white women in Canada, it means we need to invest in decolonizing systems of prevention, response, and support. And when 60% of women with disabilities are likely to experience some form of violence during their adult lives, it means we need to invest in the social supports that ensure an ability to live a life of dignity and autonomy. We know there's much work to do. I'm so pleased that this conversation is being centered here on this day with the people around me. And I look forward to the conversation and to having our day-to-day started in a good way by our elder. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Aisha. And it is my honor to welcome and introduce Elder Thelma Morisseau. Elder Thelma Morisseau is a grandmother of 4, great grandmother to 1. Her area where she attended, great grandmother to 1. Her ancestry is Ojibwe Anishinaabe, and she comes from the community of Crane River in Treaty 2 area where she attended day school. She remembers and honors the matriarchs who influenced her life and are her role models. They carried the beautiful language of their people, Anishinaabe Mawan, Ni Mama Iban, and Nukumis Iban, her mother and maternal grandmother. Thelma graduated from the University of Manitoba with her Bachelor's of Social Work, and she dedicated her career to working as an advocate for children and families in the Indigenous community. Thelma has extensive work with the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirited peoples, including attending and supporting the National Inquiry, and she is now with the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls and Two-Spirited Implementation Committee and team. Thelma shares what has been the most important for her involvement and active participation in Anishinaabe ceremonies for the past 35 years. Welcome, Elder.
Okay. Bonjour. Thank you. I'm just going to pour a little bit of water. Just takes a minute. I actually today, I know this is filmed, but I just need to say this. Today is Black Friday, and I was supposed to go shopping. So maybe we can do that after. So Sami Gwetch for the opportunity to be here today. I want to give thanks to Diane for passing this SEMA, this tobacco, to me so that I might be able to offer a few words for the opening of this event. An extremely important event when we're talking about violence against women, girls, Two-Spirited. So today, I thought about how I wanted to do this. Each time I am asked to open with some words, I think about what would be most appropriate and how it is that I would do that. But one of the things that is extremely important for me, and I think for all of us, is that today we can say Kachimi Gwach to the spirit of creation, Gijimanado, Mede Manado. Think about today that we had this opportunity to open our eyes. We've had an opportunity to take that breath, to continue to take that breath, and how grateful we are that we have life again today. And just never wanting to take anything for granted. That as we walk upon this creation, we know that everything that was placed here was placed for a reason. And just as that grandfather travels the daytime, giving us this light, and we think about our grandmother, Nokomis, when she also, at that nighttime, she travels at nighttime. And together they ensure the movement of life will flow forever. And so, wanting to be grateful for that, never taking it for granted, and knowing at this time that we are in, this season that we are in, this winter time, being grateful for this winter, because the seasons must continue in order for life to flow in the way that it should. I think about our children all throughout creation. And I ask the grandmothers and grandfathers, all those ones who walked maybe back 7 generations, to continue to look after them. I ask our grandmothers and grandfathers to be here today in this circle, to be here today with the women that are on the stage, that are going to, that are the panel today, that are going to share some words. And I ask in a good way that we might listen with open hearts and an open mind, with that respect. It is not an easy time, any time when we talk about violence against humans, in particular women and girls and two-spirited. And I would also say that within this Turtle Island, the people of this island, Anishinaabe women and girls, continue to experience violence at alarming rates on their land. And so I pray that from this panel and all the discussions that will follow, that there could be learning opportunity to open up and hear information maybe you have not heard before, but to be open to it, and to be that one that's going to is going to look at violence against women in a different way, that you're going to do your part so that the work towards the elimination of domestic violence and any kind of violence, discrimination against women and girls, two-spirited people, can slowly be reduced. All through creation, I lift this tobacco and ask for that good life for children, and no matter where they are. I pray as well with this tobacco, asking grandmothers and grandfathers to take care of each and every one of you, take care of your families. I ask in a good way that there might be peace throughout the world. I always ask for peace throughout the world, because there is much that is happening that causes so much pain for people. And so in that way, I say to Gijamanado, Mede Manado, to accept the Sema, to hear our words today, and to guide us, give us the strength we need, a little bit of wisdom. Ayangwamazin and Wewene, to be careful in how we choose our words and what we say. As I've been taught, that once you say the words, they're out there, floating in the universe, and you can't call them back. So we have to be careful and thoughtful about our words. I also want to just remember briefly, talk about where the water comes from in this area, Shoal Lake area. So I just put a little bit of water in this copper cup, And I want to acknowledge the grandmothers, Nataubi Kwe, Kokomasanangaya, and Asuwegami Kwe, who take care of the spirit of this water. And remember at that third level where that Mede Wabu flows, that is the belief of our people, that at the time of creation, that some of that water was placed at that third level, the spiritual water, and that there are grandmothers who look after that water. And that if we pray for the water and give thanks every day for the water, that the rivers and the lakes and the streams and the oceans might continue to flow in the way that they're supposed to, and that the water would be clean. Giving thanks as well to the grandmother of all grandmothers, Nibagis Nokomis, the one that travels the nighttime, that grandmother moon. She is the one that takes care of all of the waters in creation, and giving thanks to her for the work that she continues to do. And we know that if anything stops, if any of that stops, that then we here as humans might begin to start to worry about that. So in that way, I lift this and give thanks in the four directions to the earth and to the sky world, and say miigwech to Mede Manado, miigwech ni kanagana, joem nishnam gijanamanado, joem nishnam gijanamanado, joem nishnam gijanamanado, joem nishnam gijanamanado. And that little thing at the end is just asking the Creator to bless us, to be kind to us, and to love us on this day. So miigwech ni kanagana. Sure. Thank you.
Miigwech, Elder Moriso. It's at this time now that I would like to invite Acting Deputy Mayor, Councillor Chambers, up to bring a few words.
Thank you, Ellie, and good afternoon. And thank you for inviting me to attend this meaningful and necessary discussion today as we tackle the issue of domestic violence and the reverberation that occurs through our families and through our communities. I'm honored today as the acting deputy mayor to bring greetings on behalf of His Worship, Mayor Scott Gillingham. That sounds great to say. And my colleagues on City Council, and indeed on behalf of the citizens of Winnipeg. I want to thank you for your prayer this morning, Elder Moriso. Such a beautiful words that you said this morning, as well as the kind land acknowledgement that was done earlier by Aisha, recognizing that Winnipeg is located on Treaty 1 territory, and that the water that we do drink is sourced from Shoal Lake 40 First Nations in Treaty 3 territory. Building safe and welcoming communities for all is a sign of a healthy community. We must reduce, if not eliminate, domestic violence. Over their lifetime, 22.7% of women and 14.9% of men report being victims of domestic violence. Women were more significantly and severely affected than men. They were twice as likely to have been injured in attacks. They were much more likely to have been subjected to frightening threats, and they were more likely to have suffered multiple assaults, and they were much more likely to have been upset and frightened at the time of the incident. It is critically important to deliver programs that will address the escalation of domestic violence while supporting a community-based approach of resources and support for victims, survivors, children, and families that have been affected by domestic violence. We must be committed to bringing supports and resources for survivors and families across Canada. The last 2 years of COVID, we have witnessed the escalation of domestic assaults where families were forced to isolate amidst a very uncertain and stressful times that impacted upon our mental health, economic uncertainty, and our physical well-being prior to the massive vaccination rollout. Still, we are not out of the woods as we see escalation in violent crimes in our communities. In dealing with domestic violence, it is equally important that we end the misunderstanding and stigma surrounding survivors and of domestic violence. Education around how to reduce instances of power-based intimate relationships is necessary to end the cycle of domestic violence. It's also incumbent upon me as a father to teach my sons, while also leading by example, that egalitarian partnerships have a lower risk of domestic violence. The risk of violence is increased by marital dependency and lack of economic resources. Studies have found that women who are unemployed or work from the home had a higher risk of domestic violence. We must be committed to providing a safe environment for an open and non-judgmental conversation while addressing economic abuse in a holistic approach. Developing skills and tools to secure employment or start a business to recover from economic abuse is integral to overcoming some of the fears of being able to provide for self or family. Our society has to change. It has to develop and adopt collaborative, empathic approaches to working with coalitions of women's community organizations, financial institutions, utility companies, essential service providers, telecommunication companies, industry regulators, ombudsman services, and all three levels of government, as well as the criminal justice system, prosecutors, the judiciary, as well as family justice systems, consumer lawyers, as well as researchers and academics to influence governments and industry to respond to the financial impacts of domestic violence. We must introduce primary vision objectives that empower domestic violence victims and survivors to achieve economic freedom through offering innovative entrepreneurships and employment training, coaching, health and safety training initiatives in both languages across Canada. As mentioned, throughout this pandemic, we have seen the dramatic increase in domestic violence across this country and throughout the impact of social isolation, as well as mental health and economic uncertainty. I look forward to the panel discussions today that will take place with a renewed optimism that we can conquer domestic violence and make our city, our province, and our country safe and inclusive place for all to live. On behalf of His Worship Mayor Gillingham and my colleagues on City Council, thank you for organizing this session, and I wish you the very best as you deliberate and share in the interest of all Winnipeggers. Thank you, merci, and miigwech. And with that, I would like to call on our Deputy Chief Administrative Officer for the City of Winnipeg, Maura Gear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chambers, and thank you, Ali, elders and knowledge keepers, Minister Squires, Acting Deputy Mayor Chambers, Councillor Rollins, Ms. Khan, Ms. Lavalley, and Ms. Hennessy, special guests and community leaders, and everyone joining us here today at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. I am indeed very privileged for this opportunity to represent the Winnipeg Public Service this afternoon and to join with members of Council in seeking your experience and your insights about eliminating gender-based violence. I'd like to say a special thanks to Elder Thelma Morisseau for her leadership and teachings today. I'd like to thank Isha Khan and our hosts here at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights for welcoming us all today and for your incredible outreach all year long. Thank you so much to Minister Squires for joining us for today's panel discussion. The province is a crucial partner in every discussion about safety, and on November 9th, Minister Squires announced a significant milestone, Manitoba's endorsement of the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence. As a public service, we do know there's lots of work to do to implement the plan, but we welcome the plan and we welcome access to protection and support for all who need it. It's wonderful that we have community partners here with us today including Angela Lavalley and Sherry Hennessy. Angela is a survivor and a family member of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirited Peoples. And Sherry is the executive director of the Alpha House Project. Angela and Sherry, I'd like to thank you for being here today and providing your informed advice and caring. I know that our CAO, Mike Jack, if he was here today, he would say that we're here to learn, that the city is here to learn. And if I could, I'd like to share a few thoughts about what today means to me, very simply and very directly. And the Canadian Women's Foundation reports that in 2020, 160 women and girls were killed by violence in Canada. That's an average of one woman or girl killed every 2.3 days. That's a horrible, horrible statistic. They also go on to remind us that any woman, girl, two-spirited, trans, or a non-binary person can experience this as well. Some are at even greater risk and have less access to relevant services. This includes Indigenous women, Black women, two-spirited, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, questioning, intersex, asexual, plus peoples, young women, newcomer women, and women with disabilities. I know these facts fill us all with sadness, but beyond these words and stats, these are real people. These are people with families, with loved ones, lives lost or not fully lived. That is absolutely heartbreaking. We all feel this so powerfully on the National Day of Awareness and honoring of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirited Peoples. Just seeing all those red dresses, each dress reminding us somebody that we failed, somebody who deserved better. For all of us women and gender diverse people, safety is fundamental to our health, to opportunity, prosperity, and our dignity as human beings. Safety is fundamental to everything. Nobody should live their life in fear of violence. And those of us who have the capacity to help ensure safety and justice for others, we must play our part. The threat of gender-based violence is real, it's urgent, and we have to start recognizing that reality and that urgency. Where we haven't seen the threat, we must see it. Where we haven't heard the voices, we must hear them, we must listen. And where we haven't understood the diverse needs and aspirations, we must do our best to listen, learn, understand, and act. And that's why we are all here today. As the City of Winnipeg, with Council's leadership and the efforts of staff in many civic departments, we've been doing our best to make a start. The Indigenous Relations Division is providing leadership in cultivating relationships of respect and integrity with the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited Peoples plus community. They are leading an internal working group to facilitate departmental commitments responding to the calls for justice issued by the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. They are also leading the co-development of a civic implementation plan relating to the calls for justice aimed at municipal government. This plan will also respond to the 2021 Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, Inuit, and 2SLGBTQIA plus people National Action Plan. This division is also working collaboratively with the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, Two-Spirited Peoples plus Implementation Team Advisory Committee. I'm very grateful Elder Thelma Morisseau and Angela Lavalley participate on, and we're very grateful for their teachings. The Indigenous Relations Division is doing a wide range of work with this team, with this co-implementation team, with Indigenous governments, territorial organizations, and service providers providing the Safe Transportation Task Force. This group are having very difficult and complex discussions, trauma-informed discussions, bringing together all of those who are concerned to develop recommendations for safer buses, taxi cabs, bus shelters. And we all know critical safety is a priority for the community. The Indigenous Relations Division has also established a space which will become permanent for the healing and gathering for families impacted by gender-based violence. We are thankful to Angela LaValle for envisioning this beautiful space, which is known as Rainbow Butterfly. The division also leads a very significant effort and a campaign of education and awareness for all city staff with counsel from Indigenous and Two-Spirited matriarchs. In addition, we have a equity office at the City of Winnipeg, which are providing employees with excellent training opportunities, educational opportunities, such as the panel discussion that we will have today, and to online courses such as one that provides instruction in the respectful use of pronouns and gender inclusive language. I'd like to note that this evening, in recognition of the International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women, the Esplanade Riel and the Winnipeg sign will be illuminated in orange. The tangible, visible experience will prompt deeper reflection for all of us. Finally, at the city, I'd like to acknowledge our City of Winnipeg Women at Work Committee and the City of Winnipeg Charitable Fund. They've been exploring ways that help city employees make direct contributions to Winnipeg women's shelters. All of these steps towards the goal of eliminating gender-based violence in our community. Some are small, some are larger, but they are all very much needed in the struggle for safety and dignity of all. The most important thing that we do is maintain the momentum of this conversation with partners like all of you that are here today. That's why we are here, is to listen and to learn from you and to take that knowledge back to all the employees at the City of Winnipeg so that we can see, that we can hear, we can understand and act to serve residents better so that everything we do builds a healthier, safer city. So the day might come in our lifetime when not one new red dress is added to those that we hang in the City Hall courtyard each year. I feel I will say I feel very honored and privileged to be here today, to have wisdom shared from many community partners and informed people to help move this forward. And I look forward to the panel discussion. And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you so much, Moira. Today, as alluded to, we are reflecting on 3 important commemorative dates. November 25th, today, International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. November 25th to December 10th is the 16 days of activism against gender violence, and December 6th, the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. To provide some context on these dates, a brief history can be captured on winnipeg.ca/anti-racism website. I would like to introduce to you our wonderful panel that we have here today, and I'm going to go join them here. If I can. Hello, ladies. I would like to first introduce the Honorable Rochelle Squires. Honorable Rochelle Squires is Manitoba's Minister of Families, Minister responsible for Francophone Affairs, and Minister responsible for Status of Women. She was elected MLA for the constituency of Riel in April 2016 and was re-elected in September 2019. In May of 2016, Ms. Squires was appointed Minister of Sport, Culture, and Heritage, Minister responsible for Francophone Affairs, and Minister responsible for the Status of Women. She was named Minister of Sustainable Development and retained responsibility for both Francophone affairs and status of women in August of 2017. In October of 2019, Ms. Squires became Minister of Municipal Relations, and in January of 2021 became Minister of Families. She has continued her role as a minister responsible for Francophone affairs throughout her time in government, and she is also a member of the Gender-Based Violence Committee of Cabinet, the first of its kind in Canada, and is co-chair of the Poverty Reduction Committee. A lifelong learner and writer, Miss Squires holds a BA in Communications from the University of Winnipeg, a journalism diploma from Red River College, and a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from the University of British Columbia. Before being elected to the office, she worked as a print journalist and a political staffer at both federal and provincial levels. She and her husband Daniel have a combined family of 5 children and 2 grandsons. So happy to have you here today.
Thank you.
Moving along to Sherry Hennessy, who is the Executive Director of Alpha House Project. Sherry has been working with survivors of intimate partner violence and family violence for the past 23 years in crisis shelters and second stage programs. Her roles have included working as a women's counselor, outreach counselor, family and children's counselor, and has been the Executive Director at Alpha House for the past 6.5 years. I've had the pleasure of working with Sherry over the past few years while I served on their board of directors, and the work that these organizations like Alpha House does is inspiring and critical. And seeing the amazing impact these organizations have is truly an honor. And we are moving on to Councillor Shelley Rowlands. Councillor Sherry Rowlands, City Councillor for Fort Rouge, East Fort Garry, and Chair of Property and Development. In addition to her duties as the Ward Councillor for Fort Rouge, East Fort Garry, Sherry works on council to build safer communities throughout safer streets, community safety, social and economic development, including building a more inclusive city through education, daycare, and poverty reduction efforts. This includes supports for harm reduction, equitable access, community building, and safer service delivery for those and by those that are impacted by substance abuse. Councillor Rowlands, along with Mayor Bowman, had ushered in the $1 million for 24/7 safe space. Recently, this money helped leverage $8 million from the federal government. Incredible. This work continues with Mayor Gillingham on calls to justice, as well as having responsibilities for housing within her new portfolio. And prior to becoming the city councillor for Fort Rouge, East Fort Garry, she was senior advisor to the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls and chairperson for the largest and oldest school board in Manitoba, the Winnipeg School Division. Okay. And Sherry has a bachelor's in conflict resolution studies from the University of Winnipeg. In 2010, she chose Judaism, completing the conversion process at Shari Zedek Synagogue. She is a proud Wendat woman. She lives in Winnipeg with her partner Darcy Rowlands and her 3 children. There we go.
Went on.
And last but not least, this is what happens when you have a panel with such incredible people. Angela Leveille is a First Nations woman, mother, grandmother, sun dancer, and graduate of the University of Winnipeg with a Bachelor's of Arts in Conflict Resolution and Criminal Justice. She is currently enrolled in a master's program in social work at the University of Toronto, studying Indigenous trauma and resilience. She has overcome many forms of violence and has taken a journey that led her to healing from her painful experiences. Angela is an active community member currently residing in Winnipeg. In 2015, Angela's 9-month-old granddaughter, Zaylin Emerald Rain, entered the spirit world. Like so many of our murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited, the loss of Zaylin came with many forms of injustices and unanswered questions. As challenging as it was the death of her loved one that ignited the passion for Angela to work towards a degree. She is currently the keeper of the spirit coordinator at the Mamawi Chi Itata Center. The name Mamawi Chi Ita translates from Ojibwe into the phrase, "We all work together to help one another." Mamawi Chichita Center is a strength and value-based family resource organization delivering community-based programs and services within the philosophy where am I here? Embodied in our name. In addition, there. embodied in her name. In addition, she served the years as the chairperson of Wabang Anibu Nujieg, the Children of Tomorrow. Wabang Abanunjeg was established to empower children and their families to break the cycle of violence. She is a past co-chair of the Manitoba Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Two-Spirit Coalition. She is a certified trauma therapist who makes space for people who activated their healing energy and who seek trauma support. Angela volunteers her time with women, girls, and two-spirited folks who are battling all forms of violence, inequality, addictions, systemic injustices, and those who need a safe space to be acknowledged, loved, empowered, and valued. She is also the founder of Souls on Fire, a vision of an annual run to bring awareness, prevention, and intervention on violence on women and girls, and most importantly, to celebrate and honor life. She is also part of a collective of voices who initiated the vision of the Red Dress Warming Hut, Rainbow Butterfly. She does her volunteer work with the support and love from her community. What an incredible panel that we have here today. So I'm going to start off with our first question, and this one is to each of the panelists. So you'll all have an opportunity to answer this. And the question is just very simple. Tell us a little bit about yourself, including what personally and professionally motivates you in your activism to eliminate violence against women and gender-based violence. And we can start off with Minister Squires.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me here on this panel. It is a real honor to sit beside these women warriors. And I want to thank Elder Morrisseau for that wonderful opening and for your prayer and blessing. And I also want to say thanks to your ancestors for welcoming my ancestors to this land 2 centuries ago. And I appreciate that we've done the land acknowledgement. I think it's really important that we always start with our land acknowledgement to recognize that we're on Treaty 1 territory and to acknowledge the ancestors, because that's an invitation to reconciliation, which of course is a journey. We need to ask ourselves each and every day, what are we doing to advance reconciliation today? And of course, the land acknowledgement is one small part, but also this conversation that we're having today, talking about something that unfortunately disproportionately impacts Indigenous women and girls and two-spirited and gender diverse people significantly. And so it's really important that we continue the conversation and move forward in eliminating gender-based violence. As stated, I've been elected since 2017 or 16, pardon me, and I've been really honored to have the Status of Women portfolio. And I just returned from Nova Scotia 2 weeks ago, where I met with my federal, provincial, and territorial counterparts from across this nation. And we stood, 13 of us ministers responsible for ending gender-based violence in this country. We stood shoulder to shoulder, united in an action plan, a framework to ending gender-based violence. And I think that that's important because we're all going to be moving. We have a shared vision, a shared definition of what is gender-based violence and what it is that we as a nation need to do collectively to move forward so that we can achieve equality for all women, for all gender diverse people, and for all those who are disenfranchised. And so the framework, it's online. I invite anybody to take a read of it, but it's going to see more investments in our helping support women who are fleeing gender-based violence. In the province of Manitoba, we have worked to modernize our shelter system so that shelter service is there for you when you need it. We've also introduced enhanced hotline services so that if you need to reach out, you can make that call in your language and get met with the service that you desperately need. We're working on, transitional housing. Sherry's going to talk a lot about the work in that space, and we're working as partners to ensure that housing is adequate for women, families fleeing domestic violence. So it is a real passion that I've been able to work in this field, work with incredible women leaders throughout this nation, and work towards eradicating gender-based violence, because until all of us have made it, none of us have made it.
Absolutely. That was a perfect way to end that off, Minister. And I'll just pass that on over to you, Sherry.
Okay. So for me, personally, I mean, I know a lot of people that have been affected by domestic violence, but professionally, I think for me, I worked at a school when I first started my career in social work. And I worked with a young boy who was labeled as troubled, and he was always getting in trouble. And I did a lot of individual work with him. And it came out that finally he shared with me what was happening at home. And I was able to help him and his family leave the relationship. They lived in a small rural area. They did not know of resources. So that's when my passion for this work really became. Um, and then I stayed home for a few years when my daughter was young. And then I started to volunteer in the crisis shelters. And then when I went back to work, I started in the crisis shelters. I believe for me, I get a lot of phone calls from women in the community who need people to advocate for them, who have had trouble with navigating the justice system, child and family services, the police. So a lot of my work, in particular in the past 6 years as the director, is going directly with the women to appointments and helping them to find their voice and helping them to be able to get the justice that they're needing.
That's huge, and I really appreciate that you have that inspiration to keep helping because you've seen that it's possible to do so. So thank you,
Yeah.
Sherry. Councillor Rollins, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thanks for inviting me. When you're a woman politician, you have a real keen knowledge that there's only 20% of you that ever make it to the office that you have, and that can be more difficult if there's any intersectionality there. You end up with being the only open door to which a variety of issues come. And so, whether I was a school trustee and meeting parents where they were at, and sometimes parents are in shelter and still wrestling with getting the kids out the door from the shelter right to the school division, right? And that is an important office to hold, and met with many grandmothers. That propelled me into office as a city councillor for sure. But my last job uh, was working for Jennifer Rattray at the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. So in my office at City Hall is that commitment stick that Elder Bernie made for us as we caught that report. And that still guides a lot of the work that I do as a counselor, that the National Inquiry's Calls to Justice, the TRC that I also work for. As a city councillor, you take calls from folks that are parents that are concerned that their daughter has been raped and the perpetrator is in the back lane still. And that's the open door sometimes you have as a city councillor, as a female city councillor, as an Indigenous city councillor. And then there's whole issues at the city, whether it is issues that we had last term, that Elder Thelma Morrisseau was right by my shoulder when we were dealing with the vehicle for hire and taxi cab industry. And women had something really finally to say to the city of Winnipeg with respect to their safety and comfort and violence that they had experienced on that, and violence that unfortunately they continued to experience when they were telling the story, because council is not a trauma-informed space. And I think of the work still to come. Absolutely proud that Gani Knuchik and Velma's House drew down to this territory $8 million, and the city's role in that, and Angela's role in that, in advising the city. but looking and hearing other folks that have the same concerns about gender-based violence. My other sister, Shahina Siddiqui, and the experience that women, Muslim women have, and the outreach that she has done to the city. So, I know that there's more to do. And I'm really glad that I've got the sisters on this panel always shoulder to shoulder, holding a mirror up for the city, because that propels my work.
Thank you so much, Counselor. We are definitely lucky to have you at City Hall and within the council. And very good point on intersectionality and these intersecting identities that kind of fall into our lap as well. Angela, I would love to hand it over to you.
I just want to begin by acknowledging my ancestor, my granddaughter. And thank you, Thelma, for that beautiful opening. I also want to acknowledge the two speakers who also spoke to statistics, and acknowledge the ones that don't make those numbers, because we know they are a lot higher. Because we do have to speak to the women and the children who don't make those statistics, and that would be my granddaughter. I also want to just personally speak to experiences that I didn't choose to walk this way. Unfortunately, we know as Indigenous women and girls that we are targeted in society, and learning how to almost go into survival mode and, to really be embedded in adaptation from a micro level is really essential to how we're put into places. And I utilize my experience as a survivor in the hopes that, because I was able to walk out of the darkness, I have the honor of being here to share not the gruesome details of what happened to me from the age of 3 right into, all the males that have, put violence on my body and my spirit, but to share that in that darkness that I had to learn something so I can be present and available with everything that I do today, not by myself, but with amazing people that walk with me, that stand with me, that choose to listen to me, that don't close doors on me, but who stand with me. And Jessica Paley, City of Winnipeg, Thelma, and so many amazing Indigenous women in the community, that personally, it just guides you into professional space, to not to live on the backs of trauma, not to live on the backs of, people who have been harmed, but to be in those places, because everything that has happened to me, I can't ever learn in school. I could never learn what I know and have experience in an education system, and I know that now. I, the stuff that we learn in the grassroots spaces is something that is taken and minimized, but we maximize it to the best that we can, and we utilize that as medicine. So I just want to acknowledge that, and how that we we're not there to take away from the voices of folks, but we're there to just kind of open doorways, because we have the capacity to do that. um, and to ensure that the women and the babies that don't make those numbers, that are still being harmed, are listened to, are validated, that they're met where they're at, and they're not used as a template, or they're not being compared to a template of, oh, this happened there. When we were focusing on the safe travel, even questioning the beautiful work that's being done, finding comfort in those uncomfortable questions, and asking the shelters, why are you still, hiring taxi cabs to take the woman, and doing that in a beautiful way where we're working together and not clashing, is what's being done. So when we sit in these spaces, it's really essential to come from a place of understanding and a place of medicine, and to know that the words that we're saying, it's important, because when we sit in the uncomfortableness, then we know that something is being done, and we're activating thoughts, we're activating conversations, and I'm hoping that's what we can do today.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I'm very honored to be able to learn from your words and from your wisdom. So thank you very much. This question is just going to be to open and for any panelists who wish to speak to this. So, given the pandemic, what have been issues that have arisen or have been exacerbated with respect to gender-based violence? So, are there differences among diverse women or women identifying folks? So, for example, intersectionality, intersecting identities. So, if anybody would like to go ahead and speak up on that one, feel free. I feel like we did touch a little bit on that already, but I mean, by all means, go ahead.
I just wanted to share just from experience. Like I do a lot of work with women who are experiencing violence. And pre-COVID, we understand it was already harsh. It never should have been happening. But watching the Indigenous-led nonprofit organizations really, try to flow with the minimal supports that they had financially to not only go from taking care of emotional, physical, and cultural wellness to moving into even meeting the basic needs to women and children and their families. So having programming that essentially was bringing women out of these spaces where they were being violated with their children and then doing that online. So we talk about, okay, we have all these accessible phone numbers and all of these places that people can call, but sometimes forgetting not everybody has a phone. That's the first thing that somebody will break. They will break the things that you have access to. So I think we were opened up in thinking differently on how we offer supports and using that and figuring out how can we do more and what worked and who were behind those screens and understanding too and reflecting that the government was really quick at offering CERB, financial support to all of Canada, but then we're still kind of whistling around the guaranteed livable income that can be so supportive when it comes to gender-based violence. So I just kind of reflected on that a little bit.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's one thing that got overlooked for sure is the class status of individuals and access to, availability of those kind of things at home, like you said. And if anybody would like to chime in on that as well, too.
I know for the city, there were times when we were in the pandemic where one time stands out for me because it's Melissa Stone. Everybody knows Melissa Stone. Uh, trying to talk about housing and impacts. Well, the only time she had was when she was delivering hampers. So, in trying to reflect that work in City Hall, to understand just how much community was doing and Indigenous-led organizations were doing, and the fact that you better meet on the run because folks needed you to be out there, either delivering hampers with, and then that would be also the meeting on A, B, and C with them because they had 5 to 10 to 15 jobs to do, or even food security issues. When the pandemic shut down, we got together with MLAs. And we said we're just going to work territorially, and so we knew that the emergency management system was not mature in Manitoba. That trucks were bypassing this province because of our emergency management immaturity, and that meant for a city councilor like me, I knew trucks couldn't get into Seguin. And I had those relationships with the chief. So we called in and we made sure that food was delivered there. And so it was just all, we were just working territorially. And I mean, obviously that's something I want to keep. That's realizing UNDRIP at the municipal level that I ran on. But there were moments that were also really frightening when you realized that the calls were going up in community and women were locked in and locked down, and you were hearing it, and like a psychic call, and and that part was really hard. We knew we'd gotten the 1 million in budget. We knew Velma's house was mounting during a pandemic. We knew we needed to do more. We knew West Central was mounting, but there were so much calls that you could feel in your heart, that you could almost only respond to by your heart. And that part was really bothersome and troubles me. When Premier wouldn't say we won't kick folks out of housing, I was getting calls from women who I knew I'd worked with that were living with schizophrenia that were getting kicked out of their housing. Elders that were really scared with they were getting kicked out of their housing, and that part, stays with me too. I think a lot of the water did find a different level. There were times that I called my sister Rochelle Squires, and she shook a treasury board tree and got money out the door. And so I have to acknowledge that too, that we really we worked hand in glove in those days, and really hands across the aisle. And that part, there's a lot of folks that know how to work that way, and but that stands out for me in terms of pandemic.
Phrases at the outset of the pandemic that really troubled me. One was stay at home, safe at home, and the other one was we're all in this together. And I thought there's a lot of people that are not safe at home. And no, we're not all in this together. We're in the same storm, but we all have a very different mechanism for staying afloat. Some of it for some of us it was a boat, and others it was a life raft, and others it was just their own manpower. And so we really saw many social issues just become exacerbated throughout the pandemic. And one of the things that was a real challenge that kept me up at night, many, many nights, was the staffing in our shelters, the staffing, the people that were looking after our most vulnerable people, whether you're working for individuals with disabilities, whether you're working for women fleeing domestic violence, whether you're working with vulnerable youth in care. Those individuals were we needed them to continue to go to work, and they didn't have the option of working remotely. So it was a real challenge to make sure that we had people available to serve the most vulnerable in need. And what an effort it was on community's part. I really commend everybody who continued to show up day after day after day to take care of our most vulnerable people. And they went to work when others had the ability to stay at home. And I'm forever grateful for that. And as Councillor Rollins had said, it was a lot of late nights and a lot of virtual Treasury board meetings and getting money out the door to make sure that we're flowing dollars to organizations. We also started what was called a home nutrition learning program. We know a lot of kids go to school and they get their nutrition needs met at school. And now what happens when they're not going to school? So we started an initiative where we were getting those boxes of food and other supplies out to the homes and building this network and really relying on community to help deliver some of those programs. And so we're still dealing with a lot of that. We're seeing an economy that has shifted, and unfortunately, what happens whenever there's economic pressures, whenever there's challenges in society, the people who are most marginalized are among the most affected. And here we come back to women who are oppressed, women who are survivors of gender-based violence, women who are in normal circumstances just struggling to make ends meet. They're really, really in dire straits. And that's why I'm really pleased to have had a partnership with community and other levels of government to really shore up areas where we need to get services so that people can survive and make it through this pandemic.
Yeah, and I have to, I completely agree. And, I commend all the people that were working through such a hard time, and Sherry being one of them. Incredible work that you've done, Sherry. And I know that we were all, as board members, we were making sure that you were in your best self so that you can continue doing the work that you do on a daily basis.
I think One of the big significant impacts of the pandemic was how many people that were isolated, whether they were on reserves, rural communities, who couldn't get the supports they were needing. Alpha House is a second stage program, so we're not a crisis shelter. So a typical month pre-COVID, we would get between, say, 15 to 30 crisis calls. During the pandemic, we were getting 30 to 50 calls per week. People needing shelter, shelters were full, needing toilet paper, essentials. You know, I had many people calling in tears, needing support, and there was such long waiting lists to get supports. So while we all tried our best, we still are seeing that in the shelter levels. Um, and the mental health issues that have come out of the pandemic. Um,
That's a whole other addition to everything that's already had is the mental health challenges that have stemmed from all of this. So thank you so much. I'm going to have our last question, and it's to each of you once again. So, what initiatives do you believe would help address gender violence and lower the statistics? And we can start off this way and go this way instead this time.
When I think about initiatives, I always think about expanding, like, what's people that are doing it right, people that are doing the work, and kind of asking, what are you doing? How are you doing it? And meeting people where they're at, always meeting people where they're at, throwing away those, those files that are being held, and kind of just asking what's going on now? Why the pain? And I love how Gabor Mate says it, why the pain? Not what are you using? Sometimes the pain could just be, I'm thirsty, I'm hungry, meet me there. And then maybe a little bit of that frustration goes away a little bit. And initiatives as well, when I think about, and I don't often share the personal piece because I honor his story too, but I think about, what had happened to me and the person who spent years harming me. And I remember being wrapped in love and being wrapped in, supports and resources. And as I was being held, he was not. So he wasn't being held, and he had all of his trauma. And then it was almost like watching this fire, this ball of fire. The pain was instilled here on my body, my mind, my spirit. And then when I was held, wrapped with love and supports by amazing community and family, he was over there creating, harm in another home. And then she was held with love and supports, and then so he moved on to somebody else. So then we think about, where's our focus? Where's our focus? Sometimes we need to hold on to the people doing harm. And a lot of people are uncomfortable with that. But if we hold on to our men who are doing the harm, like getting those grandmothers, getting those aunties, the ones that they'll listen to, that they'll embrace, and teaching those little boys, I know that was spoken to earlier, teaching the little boys and the children is so essential, so that we don't have to watch those harmful fires being flamed all over, and just gently being able to be guided in a good, beautiful way, and looking outside of ourselves. I think that is so essential, and I think that's a huge gap sometimes.
That's incredibly beautiful. The metaphor that you used with the
Yeah.
ball of flame and fire, I think that was huge, and so true, and totally overlooked a lot of the time. So thank you for that. And counselor,
Well, I think root causes of gender-based violence is misogyny and sexism. And so I do think it's really important to continue to really educate on how to address, everyday misogyny, sexism, so as because unless you do, things aren't well understood with respect to where that gender-based violence is coming from and out. And I'm really conscious, that this video is being created for the public service in Winnipeg, and I want to acknowledge all the wonderful public servants that do work on initiatives that either council directs or they direct, and this is a perfect example. Women at Work, what Moira mentioned, is a perfect example. We do not have sufficient amounts of women at work at the City of Winnipeg. Our equity, diversity, and inclusion team are amazing, and council has really good directed policy. But those kinds of initiatives, when my sister Cindy Gilroy first did UN Safe City, what came through the door were a bunch of hurt public servants that had, sexism and misogyny to talk about. And you can't then heal a city in a really important way if your own staff have things to say with respect to sexism, misogyny, and more. So really starting from this and acknowledging the public service that will be hearing and listening to this video is a really key initiative, and those drivers at work. Beyond that, really listening to community, and the community that's holding a mirror up and seeing what kind of city this is and what we need to be. And there are so many initiatives at the City of Winnipeg. Moira acknowledged the Indigenous Relations Division, but in reality, they are not the only players. Every single department has to take their calls to action and calls to justice and their Indigenous Accord commitments seriously. I always look at the reports every year on the Indigenous Accord requirements, and I see a lot of departments that are missing. I see a lot of counselors that are missing in their commitments. It is an accord that you sign. It's not a performative moment for a photo to say, I checked off reconciliation. It really is a call to action, and you've got work to do, and you got work to complete and crush in a year. And if you don't do it, you're supposed to kind of report on what you're going to do and whether you need to modify those commitments. So I really watch that at council. I think the city would be well served if we had timelines and teeth on those things. And I would encourage public servants to really ask those questions. Hey, if your department's missing, why are you missing? Because it's not up to IRD. It's actually up to the department and the leadership, like the executives that serve in a committee that we got Peak, and right up to the CAO and to council. And if you're a counselor and you're missing them, my door's always open. I can help you design. You are working on them, whether you know it or not. So, that those structures and initiatives, I think, are really important. They produce stuff like the 24 hours to safe space, the commitment to green space, the climate change amendments that we did to our Winnipeg Complete Communities, and more. They'll grow the initiatives that will combat the sexism, that will combat the misogyny in the city that creates the conditions for gender-based violence and women and girls and gender diverse people to be harmed.
Thank you so much, and for shedding light on, the fact that we have public service, and the public service are what helps us, and so we need to strengthen all of those around us too, right? So thank you so much, Sherry.
I still believe that we still need to educate a lot of our service providers who are helping our women. Too often it's still, what were you wearing? What were you drinking? What did you do? And that just re-traumatizes these women. It makes them feel shame. It re-victimizes them, and they then do not feel comfortable coming forward. Even when I have sat in on, police, the legal system, even at hospitals when I've taken clients, is really sad. And I think that we still have a lot of work to do to educate the systems that are working with our vulnerable population.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely a multifaceted approach that it needs to be. It needs to be on all levels and all areas and all services and resources for sure. Minister Squires.
I think one of the most important things that I can do is continue to listen to others, take advice, and then move forward with trauma informed approaches towards policies and systems and legislation that will better serve survivors, better serve people who are disproportionately impacted by, whether it be racism or sexism, misogyny, colonialism, and then move forward with investments and policies that will better enhance outcomes for all of society. Like Angela had said, we need to be thinking about men and boys. And as long as we keep talking about gender-based violence as just a women's issue and not having the men around the table helping solve that problem, we're not going to get the outcomes that we want. So making more investments in a Super Dads program that Mount Carmel Clinic offers, making more investments in supports for men and boys to ensure that they understand what is gender-based violence, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, and outlets for exploration in a way that will be healthy for them and for their partners. Working in a trauma-informed place, such as bringing in third-party reporting for sexual assault survivors that don't want to walk into a law enforcement agency, that want to have a more trauma-informed approach to coming forward to share that story of being a survivor, and having the ability to offer medical supports to survivors of sexual violence throughout the province in a trauma informed way. And by that, we need to have more sexual assault nurse examiners in throughout the province. And I think about my colleague in the Manitoba legislature, Amanda Lathland from the Paul Kamisak, had brought in a bill to ensure that we don't need to be putting sexual assault survivors on airplanes to fly them into Winnipeg to get those forensic exams, that they can get that treatment in their community. So our government had made an investment to expand the sexual assault nurse examiner uh, that space to enhance the number of qualified practitioners, and we still have a long way to go. But that is a firm commitment that we are moving on to ensure that sexual assault survivors can get to get a rape kit in their community, quite frankly, and not have to be re-traumatized. The other thing I want to highlight two bills that the legislature just passed that I'd been working on. One of them is known as Clare's Law, and it is the right to know and the right to tell. So that if you're involved in somebody and you want to know if they've had a history of violence towards women, you can get that information in a trauma-informed way. It doesn't mean walking into a police station and asking the cops to give you that information in a way that may not be trauma-informed. It's about going into a safe space and working with someone to get that information. Also, having a partner with you, whether it be a parent, a sister, a loved one, somebody that you feel comfortable, so that you're not alone when you're hearing about the information about your intimate partner that may be very troubling for you. And it's also about empowering people who may work in a space that knows information. So, for example, a woman might come into shelter and a little while later, she's in a new relationship. And Sherry might know that that partner that she's now involved in has a history. Well, Sherry can't say anything because of confidentiality. But with this new law, she has the ability, it's called the right to tell, and she can encourage that individual to seek access for information so that she can be informed. So that is one bill known as Clare's Law. And then the other bill that we also passed, it's about helping children and youth who have been sexually exploited, preventing sexual exploitation before it comes, and making others have a duty to report. Did you know that before this law was brought in, there was a duty to report if we saw child abuse, if we saw child pornography, but not child sexual exploitation? And that we couldn't get contact orders between an individual, a vulnerable individual, and a harmful individual unless something bad had already occurred. Well, sometimes that's too late. We need to be preventative. We need to be proactive. So now the law is you can get a no contact order between a harmful individual and vulnerable kids, youth, and you can also we're compelling hoteliers and ride for share and taxi industry who we know unfortunately sometimes has a line of sight into sexual exploitation. We're now ensuring that they are equipped with the tools that they need to spot sexual exploitation and report sexual exploitation, and they've reached out to us and said we want to be part of the solution and to end this scourge on individuals. So a few measures that we hope on a go forward basis will really make a difference in the lives of vulnerable people.
Thank you so much, Minister Squires. And I think that like everybody listening right now, that was a huge education piece for them too, and just being aware of how we can be an ally as well, and make ourselves somebody safe and somebody that we can come to for these kind of things. So that does wrap up the last question, and I have so much gratitude for all of you sitting here today. I would just like to say that in addition to the actions that we've highlighted so far, please know that there are always financial needs for women's shelters. So the city employees can donate to specific organizations in support of women, girls, and two-spirited peoples as part of the City of Winnipeg's charitable fund. And of course, the public can donate directly to these organizations. So just encouraging everybody to do that today. I would like to once again welcome Elder Thelma Morisseau to bring a closing prayer, and I will meet her down here.
What are the numbers on those bills?
The bills,
Yeah,
they're
we're gonna
Bill 40 and Bill 43.
40 and 43. Okay, because I never heard of it. That's interesting.
Okay.
Important. Yeah. Bonjour. I want to I want to share a little story, and I want to do that because I want to in this way recognize the women that are on this stage, and it's a story of a grandmother. One of my teachers, her name was Nojekwe Iban. She's gone on to the spirit world now. She's originally from Rosa River First Nation. This grandmother was a fourth degree Medewan, and she was the head woman of the Three Fires Medewan Lodge. And I was what you call a shkabe to her, a shkabewas. I was her helper, myself and three other women. So I learned a lot from her, and but we used to get into discussions about actually the very topic we're talking about now, violence and family, in particular with regard to our communities, the Indigenous communities. And she said, I'm going to share a dream that I had. And what she said was, this is kind of like her dream. I'm not going to give it in full detail. I don't even know if I'm supposed to do this, but somehow when I do things, I sort of think, well, okay, if it comes into my head, then it's spirit guided. That somehow the grandmothers have given me the okay to do this. In her dream, she was walking on land. There's sacred land there where the people in that community host their ceremonies. and it's right by where there's a river that flows. There's water that flows there. It's very, very beautiful. And when you go onto the land, you can feel the spirit of the land on in that area. It's just incredible. It's a beautiful place. They still hold ceremonies there. So in her dream, Nojokwe said that she was walking on that land, and as she was walking, she heard in a distance a voice. And so that voice drew her to the voice. It was pulling her. And as she got closer, she could hear it was a woman's voice, and she was singing. She was singing a song. And pretty soon she could see this figure come up over the north embankment from where the water was. And this grandmother was draped in a shawl and a long, long skirt. Her skirt touched the very bottom and touched the top of the grass. So there was that connection between her and wearing that skirt and the grass that, to the earth, our mother, the earth. And she was singing the song. And she said to Noje Kweban, she said, I want you to take this song and I want you to sing it for Anishinaabe Kwe, because there is much sorrow. And Anishinaabe Kwe is no longer walks with her head up, but she walks with her head down. And what you see in her is pain. So I want you to take this song and sing it. Go out through creation, Turtle Island, and sing this song for the women. I can't sing it here, and I'm sorry I can't do it, but I can't sing it in this setting. But basically what the song talked about is talked about the essence of woman, the beauty of woman. And I don't mean the physical outside, but the very centered, the inner part of woman. As she is the life giver, she carries life. She is the one that nurtures and brings forth life into creation. And we are told that woman is fashioned just like the earth in that very same way. We know the earth has the first female that was placed here on creation, and that humans, we were the last. And she, that grandmother, that grandmother said to her, I want for women, and this is the teachings from Anishinaabe teachings, our people, but it can be applied to all women throughout creation, because all women can, if they choose, bring forth life. That women need to begin to see themselves as they are, the very beauty of who they are. Inside their very vessel that they carry, where that life comes from. And that when they walk upon the earth, all of that land is sacred. Everything on our mother is sacred. And as she puts her footprints on that land, she too is that sacred being. And so I say this to the women on this stage: you are that sacred being. And to remember that, and I see that the topic that we talk about when we talk about violence in our communities, whether it's in an urban setting or a community in out in the country, or reserve, or a Métis community, wherever it is, it's difficult. It's difficult to continue to walk in this creation when women are still, and children and two-spirited are still experiencing this level of violence. And I, I has a ceremonial woman, has a ceremonial grandmother that I have walked for many years, um, for the purpose of recollecting the bundle that my people left. It was set aside for so many years because although I went to university, my greatest healing and my learning came from the lodge that I have walked in for over 30 years. That has been my university to help me know who I am as an Anishinaabe Cree. And I really believe that has a people, because all peoples have a beautiful story, their original stories, and about how what it is, the bundle that Creator gave to you, all of us. Everybody has a bundle, an original bundle, just as we have. And so I say to people, put your hand back, reach far, and look for your original bundle and begin to put it together for you that applies for your life. Just as I say to Anishinaabe, and Anishinaabe really means first people. It doesn't mean a particular tribe. It's all people, original people of Turtle Island, to do the very same thing. And we are doing that. We are beginning to pick up our songs, our languages, that identifies who we are and what our role is in this creation, because we all have a purpose. We've been placed here for a reason. And so I encourage that for the women and the children and the youth, the two-spirited, to begin to do that work and pick it up, because I believe that is part of a necessary thing they have to do in order to help them in their growth and in their healing. I think we need to feed our spirit, and as we feed ourselves physically through food and we drink water, and as we feed our intellect and our mind and our emotions through study, we need to feed our spirit. However we do that in a good way, we need to do that to create that balance. And so I raise my hands to the women panel, to the women that have been working. I watched them with the sign language, what a gifted work that they do. To all of you, and to those of you who are out there watching this, I raise my hands to you as well, and with the hope that we can go back to our own places and make a difference about stopping the violence that's occurring in our homes and our communities and our country. That do your part. And I really encourage the men to stand strong, because I always see women standing. I see women standing and women wearing so many hats, but I want the men to stand up too. You begin to start wearing those hats, and you begin to start talking to your brothers and to your uncles and to your grandpas, about your sons, about how violence is not acceptable in our society, and that how it is that we must treat the women in our life, because a woman gave birth to you. A woman gave you life. And so remember that. Go back and do that, even if it's in a small way. So in that way, I say Kachimi Grudge to grandfathers and grandmothers who have stood with us today, who I know sat with each of you today, to give you the strength to be able to talk about all that you've been able to talk about today. To all of you, And so miigwech, and I ask Spirit to take care of you and your families, your communities in a really good way. In that way, I say miigwech, ne kanagana, miigwech.
This concludes our event, and thank you to everyone who joined us today, our panelists, and the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. Miigwech.